The war against insurgency in the Lake Chad Basin has continued to generate talking points, especially with the recent exploit of Nigerian troops and the joint encounter with the Chadian forces. Why has Chad suddenly woken up to the call of clearing their territories, which hitherto was a safe haven for hibernating terrorists, despite a loud outcry from stakeholders over the years since the armed expedition began? Furthermore, the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19, remains the greatest catastrophe to befall this generation. With the death of thousands, it has already provoked a global lockdown. As Nigerians join the rest of the world to contain the spread of this deadly virus, many questions come to mind. What are the security implications of the ongoing lockdown? How will it impact on global peace and security? This and more will be our focus on Security Dossier today. I am Lawrence Aldu. Welcome to Television Nigerian. The Nigerian Army has commissioned 55 combat vehicles to be inducted into the Northeast Theatre of Operations to boost the war on insurgency. Commissioning the vehicles on behalf of the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukur Buratai, the Chief of Army Logistics, Major General Joel Onuigbe, said this is in line with the policy of ensuring a professionally responsive force in the defense of Nigeria's sovereignty. The report is presented in our studios. The Nigerian Army has procured and commissioned 55 Buffalo four-wheel vehicles to increase the mobility and combat efficiency of its personnel in mission areas, especially the ongoing counter-insurgency operations against the Boko Haram terrorists in the northeast. Commissioning the vehicles in Abuja on behalf of the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukur Buratai, the Chief of Logistics, Nigerian Army, Major General Joel Onuigbe, said this was a strategic directive to sustain a responsive and professional Nigerian Army in unrelenting fight against insurgency in the northeast.
The strategic directive of the Chief of Army Staff for year 2020 is to sustain a responsive and professional Nigerian Army in the conduct of its constitutional duties. And one of the key tenets of this directive is sustain logistic support to all Nigerian Army formations, units, and operations.
General Onuigbe said the newly acquired vehicles will ease troops' mobility, movement of logistics, and combat maneuvers. He assured that the Nigerian Army will continue to defend the nation from both external and internal threats, as well as providing aid to civil authorities in other national emergencies. From the Mogadishu cantonment in Abuja, Lawrence Aldu, TVN News. Welcome back. The war against insurgency in the Lake Chad Basin has continued to generate talking points, especially with the recent exploits of Nigerian troops and a joint encounter with the Chadian forces. Why has Chad suddenly woken up to the call of clearing up their territories, which hitherto was a safe zone for hibernating terrorists, despite a loud outcry from stakeholders over the years since the armed expedition began? These and many other security-related questions will be the major focus on the program today. I am being joined on the line all the way from the United States of America by a renowned academic from the University of Northern Iowa, Professor Peter Agbese. Prof, welcome to Security Dossier.
Thank you very much, Lawrence.
The war on insurgency in the northeast of Nigeria and by extension the Lake Chad Basin has gone on for too long. Why is this conflict not coming to an end, Prof?
It is not coming to an end because it has metamorphosed into a regional conflict. The conflict is still the terrorism by Boko Haram, which centers on Nigeria, but Boko Haram has been able to attack neighboring countries, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, respectively. And its ability to move in and out of any of these four countries has made it very difficult for the group to be wiped out militarily.
Chad has been a country in the West African sub-region, I mean, sorry, in the Lake Chad Basin that has been accused severally of harboring the hibernating terrorists. All of a sudden, President Deby seemed to be taking the glory. What's the problem? What's really going on?
Well, the Chadian forces launched a major military offensive against Boko Haram and dealt a very major blow to Boko Haram. The question is, why did Chad all of a sudden do this? Although since 2015, after President Buhari became the president of Nigeria, and one of the first places he visited was Chad in order to help coordinate a regional response to Boko Haram. But Chad had not been able to pull its weight. Now it's been able to do that because Boko Haram slaughtered 92 Chadian soldiers in one fell swoop. I think that was the largest number of soldiers Boko Haram had been able to kill in either Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, or the Republic of Niger. So this therefore propelled the Chadian forces to take action against Boko Haram, which I think is a very welcome development. I know some Nigerians are deriding Nigerian soldiers for not having done as well as the Chadian forces had done. But that's to ignore all the major sacrifices and the efforts Nigerian soldiers have made in order to curtail the terrorist activities of Boko Haram. But the fact that Chad now has become very active with its recent attack on Boko Haram, it's a major development indeed.
Are you not worried at the rate at which Nigerians are increasingly becoming unpatriotic with their utterances? I'm talking about chanting down on the efforts of the Nigerian military, especially on social media. Are you worried about this, Prof?
Yes, I'm very worried because Nigerian soldiers have paid a very high price in the war against Boko Haram. Not just in terms of soldiers who were killed, but those wounded, soldiers who have been operating in the war front for several months without seeing other members of their families. So it's been a very high cost. We have not really learned how to appreciate the patriotic sacrifice of our men and women in the armed forces. And it is particularly disconcerting to see Nigerians deriding their own soldiers, despite all the efforts our soldiers have made, particularly in the war against Boko Haram. When Nigerian soldiers are sent outside Nigeria, they do very well. And even inside the country, they have paid a very high price and have dedicated themselves to routing out Boko Haram. And they should be applauded rather than excoriated. So I find it very disconcerting indeed.
But don't you think this is some form of leadership failure on the part of our Nigerian authorities, who are supposed to, ginger the younger ones into hailing the troops into victory, or people who are in authorities, people who should ordinarily be in the forefront of mobilizing support for the military? What has gone wrong? Because this is really very disturbing.
Well, part of the reason why there is such discouragement on the part of some of the Nigerian commentators on social media was the great expectation that this Boko Haram terrorism will not have lasted this long. And so the fact that it is still ongoing since it started over 12 years ago, it's leading to skepticism. And also when people read about the onslaught against Boko Haram, where Nigerian soldiers will say, today we launched attack against Boko Haram, we killed so many soldiers, so many Boko Haram forces and their officers, and yet day in, day out, Boko Haram is able to launch guerrilla tactics against military and civilian targets. That makes people to wonder whether the military is lying. And to be fair, in the past, the military lied to the Nigerian public about the war effort. That's no longer going on. But the fact that in the past the military gave out wrong statistics or just blatant lies had led to some skepticism. There is a lot the Nigerian government, both at the federal and state levels, can do to ginger up more support for our armed forces. But it is incumbent on us as citizens to learn to appreciate the efforts our soldiers are making.
How can we mobilize support? How do we make it possible for Nigerians to begin to support these guys on the front line?
Well, it has to come from the government. There has to be a policy on how our soldiers are treated officially. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I was on a plane to travel from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to Austin, Texas. Before we boarded the plane, the body of a dead American soldier who was killed in Afghanistan was going to be taken to Austin to his parents. And we were kindly requested to wait until the body was loaded onto the plane before we could board. And the body was loaded onto the plane. It was there was a ceremony. The corpse was saluted by all the soldiers. Then when we landed, we were then requested to remain seated until the body was taken out of the plane. And again, there was a ceremony. His relatives were there. Other military personnel were also there. The body was then taken out of the plane and given to his parents with an American flag that was draped over the coffin. This was then wrapped up and given to the parents. And I was highly impressed. This is how you show appreciation for someone who has made an ultimate sacrifice, dying on behalf of the nation. So if the Nigerian government can come up with specific policies on the type of respect our fallen heroes can be given, then those of us in the civilian segment of the population will take a cue from that. But where the soldiers are not properly treated by the government, by the military authorities, then it becomes easier for people to pour scorn on the soldiers.
Now, recently, the Defense Headquarters made a clarification on how some Nigerian troops suffered a number of casualties while on a mission to clear insurgent camps, talking particularly in the northeast. From the way the operations, the media operations coordinator, I'm talking of General Enenche, spoke, he suggested that there might be a sabotage of a sort, you know, given the location of the troops, their movement, and all whatnot. Now, this has become a recurring decibel. You know, each time our troops have to face insurgents, there's one sabotage or the other, leading to, you know, a number of casualties. Prof, this is very worrisome. Do you think the authorities, you know, still need to do more to be able to apprehend some of these people who divulge information to terrorists? Or I don't know, I'm just, you know, trying to, you know, to look at it from the other side. What is your point? I mean, what do you have to say on this?
Well, in any war situation, one of the things that both
Hello, Prof, did you get that?
Yes, I did. In any war situation, one of the most important things the military has to do is to collect intelligence on the enemies, but also to ensure that its own intelligence doesn't leak to the enemies. Nigeria has not been able to do well on both counts.
Yeah, because from a video that circulated, Prof.
Yes.
Sorry, Prof. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, go ahead, Prof.
Oh, yeah. No, I was saying that one of the most important tasks for any military, particularly military involved in a war, is to be able to gather intelligence on the enemies and also to prevent its own intelligence from being leaked to the enemies. But unfortunately, Nigeria has not been able to do well on both counts. We don't have much actionable intelligence on Boko Haram. Boko Haram seems to know more about the operations of Nigerian forces than Nigeria does of the Boko Haram. The situation has improved somewhat, but it was really very bad. And sometimes too, some of the military operations can be predicted, and therefore it was easy for Boko Haram to be able to launch ambush attacks on the armed forces. So, for example, when those girls were abducted at Chibok, so Nigerian soldiers were sent from Maiduguri all the way to Chibok. And now the distance from Maiduguri to Chibok, it's almost 100 kilometers, I think. Now, Boko Haram knew these soldiers were going to come by road. And so all they had to do was to lay ambush along the path that these soldiers were going to come from Maiduguri. And so a military operation like that becomes so easy for the enemy to predict, then becomes very difficult for Nigerian soldiers not to suffer great casualties as a result of intelligence failure. But in terms of video circulating in the mass media, you also have to take into account, it's not just the war front where soldiers are shooting against Boko Haram. You also have the war front in the social media, and we have not been able to control the type of images that circulate. Boko Haram is able to upload its video, it's able to upload speeches by Abubakar Shekau, and this gets easy play. And because of the degree of skepticism that some Nigerians have about military operations, it becomes easy for Boko Haram video to be given a lot of airplay.
You have been watching Security Dossier on Television Nigerian. The program will continue after this timeout. Stay tuned. The Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukur Buratai, has assured that insecurity in Nigeria will soon become a thing of the past. General Buratai gave the assurance while on an inspection tour of the Nigerian Army vehicle manufacturing plant in Kaduna, where light tactical infantry combat vehicles were being produced. The civil delivering plant, in conjunction with the Defense Industries Corporation, also produce weapons for the military and other security agencies.
I know everybody is concerned about the insecurity, but unfortunately over the years, since 60s, we've not made any serious headway, local defense projection. And I think if this one takes off as we envisage, we'll no longer cry for any insecurity.
Already, the company is poised to mass-produce vehicles for civilians in order to boost the GDP of the country. Lawrence Audu, TVN News. Welcome back. We have been speaking on the war on insurgency and Chad's calm in the fight with Professor Peter Agbese, who is on the line from the University of Northern Iowa. Prof, welcome back to Security Dossier.
Thank you very much.
President Muhammadu Buhari, in a nationwide broadcast, outlined the efforts of his government in containing the outbreak of the novel coronavirus in Nigeria. Some of the measures include a lockdown of some affected states, while urging Nigerians to maintain social distance. Prof, we're going to talk about the security implication of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic now, and how it affects global security. From your end, what is the assessment of the global pandemic COVID-19 from your perspective?
Well, in terms of the number of people who have been confirmed to have tested positive, the number keeps increasing. So, for example, here in the United States, as of yesterday morning, over 400,000 people had contracted the disease, with over 12,000 people already dead. Now, only about 1.8 million people in the U.S. have been tested. So out of 1.8 million, 400,000 tested positive. So if we extrapolate to the larger population, and the U.S. has about 320 million people, then you know that if even 10% of the population were to be tested, the number of those who test positive will be very high. So this is a major global threat, not just in terms of the health implications, But even the economic implications are far wider than the health implications of the virus. Because in terms of lethality, the World Health Organization estimates that it kills only about 3.3% of those who contract it. That's very, very low compared to many other diseases. But what makes the virus so frightening is the fact that it can make so many people sick at the same time. And there are no hospital facilities that will be able to admit and treat that large number of people. So that's what makes it scary. In the Nigerian case, it is particularly more scary given the fact that we have very antiquated health infrastructure. So if it were to hit Nigeria at the same rate that it has hit countries like Iran, the US, Italy, Spain, and China, then the havoc that it will cause will be unimaginable. And so any effort made to curtail it, I think, should be applauded. And there is just only one way to stop the spread, and that is through social distancing. Now, unfortunately for us as Africans, that hits at the core of our cultural value.
Do you see any possibility that the path to containing the epidemic is narrowing in Nigeria?
What the Nigerian government did, which was to impose restrictions on movement, to encourage people to maintain social distancing, were theoretically correct. The problem is that those policies did not take into account the economic reality of most Nigerians. I wrote a short paper on this a few days ago. I refer to it as the Morton's fork. A Morton's fork is a situation in which someone has two alternatives, both of which are terrible alternatives. And that's exactly what most Nigerians are faced with. You either stay at home and die of hunger, or you come out and you contract the disease. Those are two terrible alternatives. And the fact that no provision was made for most Nigerians who live day to day means that it is difficult for them to see the danger in the virus. You know, you tell people virus is coming, it is not yet here. And yet now you have to go without food. You have to stay at home. You have no means of earning your daily bread. Just look at the number of people who hawk things on a daily basis in Nigeria. Look at the number of people who are hairdressers, who are barbers, who sell recharge cards. These people don't have any income other than the day-to-day little profit they make from their businesses. Now they can't do any of that. And the government has no provision on what they can do. You take it where people have not been paid their salaries, and yet you ask them to be locked, to have a lockdown so that the disease will not affect them. This is not how to fight a pandemic. Here in the United States, the U.S. Congress had passed a special budget of $2.3 trillion. Each American citizen will be giving $1,200 as a financial incentive to deal with the virus. We don't have much of that in Nigeria.
Okay, Prof, some religious organizations have defied government orders on public gathering. Now, is this not disturbing?
Of course it is disturbing, particularly a disease that spreads through contact. And then you tell people, don't congregate in churches and in mosques and in other places, because those places can become vectors for the virus. And then you defy the government. You say, oh, you obey a higher order. God is a higher order than the government. Well, if you are not alive, whose higher order are you going to follow? So if religious leaders are irresponsible enough not to care about the lives of their congregationists, those are, in my opinion, I would consider to be foolish religious leaders. Look at it this way. Most of those religious leaders, and particularly the Christian pastors, are more interested in the tithes that their members pay rather than the health of their members. Some of them are even encouraging their members under this circumstance in which most of the congregationists have lost their means of livelihood to continue to make donations online. This is the time when the churches should come to the aid of its congregationists, and therefore requiring people to continue to make donations, I think just shows what the true intent of many of those religious leaders is.
Situation in Jos, Plateau State. You know, Jos has been an epicenter of religious conflict in northern Nigeria for a number of years now. Sheikh Yahya Jingri, who is a leader of the Izala sect, you know, led his people, you know, on a Friday to a Jumat prayers, and thousands of people congregated at the entire mosque in Jos. Now, with the situation, you know, taking a new dimension, and religious leaders continuing to defy government orders, a total lockdown in a country like Nigeria, where a lot of people have to, you know, go out on a daily basis to find food, wouldn't there be a security breach at the end of the day, where shops are looted and so many other security vices, you know, come to play?
Yes, even here in the United States, there is a pastor in Texas who was arrested when an order was passed that there should be no religious services. He was arrested, but after he was released, he vowed that he will continue to hold church services. So there are some churches, particularly down in the southern part of this country, where people have defied the lockdown order and continue to hold services on Sunday. Fortunately, those are the minorities. In the case of the young Izala in Jos, yes, if they say, the Malan says there is no corona and therefore there is no corona, you know that they are just repeating what the Malan had told them. The Malam is not a scientist, he's not a medical doctor, and obviously he's only going to look at this from a very narrow religious perspective. What is important is for the government to be aware that there are people like that who will defy such an order, and the government has to come up with a program in which such people are held to the law.
Is Africa prepared, or we might just have another Holocaust waiting to be unleashed?
Africa is not prepared for the virus. If we look at places like Italy, Spain, the United States, China, Iran, the United Kingdom, these are places with the best medical facilities anywhere in the world, and they were not ready for corona. So how can Africa, with its antiquated health system, be ready for a virus like this? Our only hope is that it doesn't infect as many Africans as it has infected people around here. Because if it does, it will be worse than a Holocaust. And we are not talking about exceptions. We are talking about virtually the entire African continent. Look at South Africa. South Africa has the highest rate of infection, and South Africa has the best medical facilities on the continent. So if South Africa cannot handle it, how can a country like Nigeria or Burkina Faso or Chad be able to handle it? And so if it does hit Africa at the same rate as it has been hitting other countries, then it will be woe unto all of us virtually. And as I was saying earlier, the problem with the virus is not just the health risk, the economic risk, but also it is antithetical to our cultural well-being. We are not a people used to isolating ourselves. We are a communal people. The virus attacks that communitarian essence of African culture. And so even if it doesn't hit Africa at the same rate it's hitting the rest of the world, we also have to take into account the damage it is going to do to this, our cultural fabric, the cultural fabric that has kept us together all these years, that helped us to overcome slave trade, that helped us to overcome colonialism and neocolonialism. So I see the virus as a threat on health grounds, as a threat on economic grounds, and as a threat on cultural grounds. I was particularly disturbed when some Nigerians, when the virus first hit Nigeria, were jubilating that this was a disease of the rich and famous. And I wrote a piece arguing that when something is a disease, when the rich and the powerful cry in Nigeria, the downtrodden also cry. But when the downtrodden cry, the rich and powerful do not cry. Now, so to me now, what the virus has become is that the big and wealthy people's headache has become the cancer of the downtrodden in Nigeria. And it's a cancer not so much in health grounds, but a cancer in economic grounds. The number of people who have gone without food and medicine for the past few days in Nigeria, it's really quite alarming. And so even though the virus has not hit Nigeria in the same proportion as most of us feared, its economic devastation has already become quite apparent.
Prof, before I let you go, I want to ask you one question. Is the coronavirus issue related to the development of the 5G technology? Nigerians are already raising conspiracy theories about this.
Well, when something unexpected like this comes about, people will come up with all sorts of theories. One of the most stupid is the linkage of 5G with coronavirus. It is a virus. 5G is radiation. There is no linkage between the two, none whatsoever. And what has made this seemingly credible is that in Nigeria, this bogus theory is being propagated by religious leaders. There is nothing that links 5G with the virus, none whatsoever. And if that were the case, then Africa doesn't have to worry about it because we don't have 5G installed anywhere yet. It is not true. It is the same theory that says this signifies the end of the world. This is the work of Antichrist. You know, Antichrist. What is the Antichrist's name? Just Antichrist. You know, it's completely bogus. There is really nothing to it. And we better trust science rather than conspiracy theories, particularly conspiracy theories that have no basis whatsoever, other than somebody waking up and just creatively coming up with things that don't make much sense.
Well, Prof, it was a great time having you sharing your views on the current global trends and other security-related issues in the country. Thank you so very much, Prof, for coming on Security Dossier today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you so very much, sir.
You're welcome.
And stay safe.
Thank you. I'll try. Fortunately, our restrictions are not that much. All right.
Nigeria remains the only country we can call our own. We must be patriotic and defend the Constitution by every available means through constructive criticism, while we support our military and other security agencies as they do their own part to secure the nation. Negative and debasing comments, especially on the social media, will only get us into more deadly quagmire. Be patriotic, be Nigerian. This is the much we can take on Security Dossier today. Until I come your way again with another exciting edition. I am Lawrence Audu. Bye for now.